Hi everyone and welcome to this conversation with Mangai and Revathi. This conversation is part of a series that is celebrating Jannate Manch's 50 years. We are trying to have conversations with different people from theatre and from the performing arts to know a little bit more about their work, their journey, and kind of bring it into the public sphere. So today we are speaking to Mangai and Revathi. Mangai has been working in Tamil theatre as a actor, director, researcher, activist for the last at least 30 years. And her field of interest are kind of intersect between theatre, gender, translation studies, and much more, as we're going to hear today. She has directed over 35 plays, and all of them address questions of gender and sexuality directly, and kind of reanimating women from history, mythology, and also actively involving gendered minorities, including queer and trans folk, in the theatre making process. And her book, Acting Up, which is right here with me, was published by Leftward in New Delhi. And that again is a book that documents gender in theatre in India from 1979 onwards. Revathi is a Tamil poet, an Ambedkarite and feminist activist. And Mangai and her have been kind of co-travelers for several years. She too has been actively involved in the women's movement in street theatre. In addition to plays, she's also worked in Tamil cinema, made a documentary film. And more recently, her interests have been focused on education, and especially the role of the arts in education. Post the tsunami of 2006, she founded Vanavil, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, which is Rainbow in Tamil, for marginalized tribal children in the Nagapattinam region. Okay, so just to start, I thought maybe we could start with a few broad questions. Mangai, if I can start with you, we know through your work over the last many years that you've always engaged sort of directly with questions of gender, of thinking around marginalization. But could you tell us a little bit about, what's shifted over the last couple of years, especially, as we've been in lockdown? How have your explorations in this area changed, in terms of your theatre work?
To put it lightly, it has been a roller coaster. So I think many of us were learning a lot of new things. But I just want to share how these 2 years passed, or we pushed out these 2 years. I think one is about staying in touch. I mean, it looks so simple that we are in different parts and we feel connected here. But then for theatre people, not to be able to meet in one space and hold the space together, I think was the first jolt. So our exchanges began with just having weekly meetings, especially for group members whose backgrounds don't really permit discussion of the arts. It's always seen as something that only people who are jobless will do. And some of them were from remote places, so they had to sit outside or on the terrace with the telephones and things like that. So that's how it began. But I think another major thing is about breathing. I think what is going to stay with me is this mask, both literally and metaphorically, about not able to breathe or share the same air that all of us breathe, which is when I think in 2020, when the many women's movement came together and they had this campaign called If We Do Not Rise. So it was an extension in many ways about citizenship laws and then various atrocities, so to speak, and then the lockdown and the migrant workers' walk, which still keeps ringing in our images and our head. So, and plus we also had a custodial death in Tuticorin of a father and son in the police station, all of which coincided with the images of Black Lives Matter.
Right.
So I think it was Maya Angelou who really brought it all for us together. What started off as just a sharing of her poem really led us to do this play, Siripudan Varadu, translated as One Can Only Laugh. It's available on YouTube, so I don't want to really go into the contents of it. But if I can connect it to the idea of gender and sexuality, I think one is in our cast, we also had a trans woman who has been active in Tamil theatre now for over 15 years. So she is a theatre person apart from her identity of the trans woman. And it was so difficult for her to stay in one place.
Right.
So she was shifting houses because they all lived together in some form, small or big. And she also had her mother's family and home which she needed to visit. And so whenever we came on Zoom, just to see her house, and I still remember very vividly the tin roof over her head, and it was hot. July, so not so hot by our standards, but it was still hot. And she was sitting there trying to connect when so many things were happening outside, so that, and then plus we also had these cases of domestic violence, not just in India, but all over the world. France had to open hotels and keep the rooms ready for temporary shelters for women. And I think the whole world saw it. So that I thought was a very important question. Who are we kidding? Stay home, don't come outside is all okay. But then when the home itself is hell, what do people do? So I think that really kind of led us. Plus we had horrible news of sexual violence against young kids. I don't know, maybe because you're not really meeting others as you would otherwise, and you're taking in all this binge watching and the news and everything, that really, really troubled us. So those are the issues that we really took up as part of the women's campaign. But because we chose this Zoom format, it also opened up new avenues. We did have technical glitches all the time. So somebody or the other would get dropped off. They won't have connection. They'll be in a place where there's not enough connection. So however much we invested in Bluetooth mic, but still there were all these hiccups. So one of the shortcuts that we really, not shortcuts, I think it was, for us, if somebody is watching something and then one window suddenly goes blank or they just thrown out, what do we do? How do the audience get the link or keep in touch with the narrative? So we thought of going in for closed caption.
Right.
And anyway, we could have done it in Tamil also, so the text will be running. But then we chose to do the closed caption in English, which really meant that we could do it nationally and internationally. So we opened this play on September 2nd for national level campaign. And we started off the campaign in Tamil Nadu. September 5th was a date that was fixed for everyone to do. And on that day, we did an international performance. And I just thought, September 5th is no more Teachers' Day for us. It is Gauri Lankesh's murder.
Yeah.
So it is the day of shutting down voices. And here we were trying to connect and say that you can't shut us down.
Yeah.
It felt like a new life, I should say.
And I'm quite interested in what, because you've written so much around thinking around community and how that works through theater. And I also, I read a little bit and followed the way that you had done this production, where you also had these kind of panels that were organized around it. So just how did you think of the kind of, larger life that is around this production, both in terms of the community of actors that are now all on Zoom, but also thinking around, larger questions of community, which are so central to your work. So how did that conversation evolve?
I mean, in fact, the first panel we had Revathi with us. Yeah. But I think that particular show on September 2nd was particularly very moving because, I mean, apart from the people who were on Zoom, there was also Facebook Live. And you could, people typed in from very, very remote corners of Tamil Nadu. And I mean, if we know the way women's movement organized, we also know that if one person has signed in, there are at least 10 people in that window. So it was really, really moving to see those comments that were coming through. And then, I mean, initially we thought this is a difficult play, both for the actors and the audience. But then it was, I should say surprised. We were surprised that it could move beyond these boxed screens and actually touch the raw nerves in some form or the other, And the panels helped shape them. Panels kind of gave. We usually did it after the performance, so that it could also be both on the idea of performing online, plus also the content part, which we wanted. So it was both a pretext for a discussion and also the form itself. One of the reasons why we stuck to the whole thing that we don't want it to be recorded and streamed live. We want to perform it live online so that everybody knows all the hiccups that are there. Like in real performance, you also have hiccups in this performance. So yeah, but it was all virtual. I mean, I'm still dealing with it. I really don't know how to take in virtual presence. I also don't belong to this generation which is comfortable with that. So, it's crazy that you can see, but you can't touch people. So, but then we did touch. I mean, even our rehearsals, when we did, instead of holding hands, we found a way by which we can touch, or show or breathe or go in for cueing. So many of our rehearsal process also taught us a lot of things.
Yeah, I think I just want to add one thing. One of the limitations of doing something on Zoom, I saw the play, is that we are fragmented, theater is coming together. It's like that collective energy, but in a, I won't say it's a strange way, in a beautiful way, it helped this particular performance because all the four of them were coming from different, I mean, there was a dissonance, but that dissonance added to that piece I felt. And that was interesting because I also have serious doubts about online theater, but still in that particular piece, especially, it was like the deepest of the lockdowns when people were like, had nothing else other than staring at screens, locked up in the rooms. And looking at those four people coming from completely different four places, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically, and each was building a different kind of defense. And that was very moving for me when I saw the performance.
And then Mangai, I think you also did another play, right, in 2021, another production around child sexual harassment. If there's a little bit that you could tell us around how that evolved and how kind of that process was, because also 21 was a very different world from 2020 already.
No, actually, like I said, even before that, especially child sexual abuse kind of shakes you up in a way. I mean, I don't think we can compare the responses, but it just does something really horrible to all of us all the time. How many ever times you keep listening to them. But what happened in 2021, I don't know whether to call it a good response or a bad response, because of this so much of online presence, the social media, both on Instagram and Facebook, lot of children who were probably now spread all over the place, were opening up to each other about things that happened in their own schools, and many of them were responding to complaints that were coming right now at the school. And these are students who must have finished some 10 years ago, 20 years, or 10 to 15 years ago. And then they were pitching in and raising it as a major issue, especially in Chennai. And those were really highly reputed schools with big money and stuff. And it became really, really ugly. I mean, we have had one person who was arrested and the case is still going on. And I think there's one more case that is filed in. There were movements against some of the schools led by the SFI and various other students in women's movement. But still, I don't think the cat is out of the bag yet. So when these numerous things happen, in fact, when I decided that we should do something about this, especially if the schools were on lockdown for a long time and they were going to reopen again, I thought we should really take this up as a fresh turn and take it to the schools and teachers and students and everything. We actually designed it as a solo piece, but trained 3 actors so that how many ever shows we get invitations for, we thought we could take it as a campaign. And I think I've come back to this format after years, after many years, after almost close to 2 decades, I've come back to this format of campaign. I mean, it didn't take off because we again had truncated lockdowns, the schools are, I'm hoping July, August it will happen.
So this was designed as an in-person performance, right?
Yes, yes. But designed as an in-person performance with the counselor present and probably for a smallish crowd. I was just thinking of 1-hour classes and you can perform in the classroom. So do it for 25-30 minutes followed by discussion, which the counselor can take it up and the school can do something about it and the government can do something about it. And also kind of just, I think we began with that sentence, my body, my right, and no, I mean, apart from the abuse itself, it was not about the abuse, it was about surviving it and healing and to actually kind of rally young people, young and the old, perhaps, to really talk about it and create a space for really discussing that this exists among us and we can't hide it anymore. We can't put it under the carpet because we had ugly ways in which the wives of the perpetrator was responding. Sometimes both of them were teachers and they were both simultaneously blaming the child. And then there were suicides, so many suicides of young girls whose notes and everything. They gave a list of other people, other perpetrators, as well as other friends who were affected. It was really, really crazy. At one point to make this play, I think I sat and read somebody, I mean, those posts were all taken down, but one of them had collated it, about 4,000 Instagram posts. And I just shut the computer, phone, everything for like 4 days to recover from that, So, I mean, it is still raw. So I'll have to wait and see. But then I think somebody like Revathi, who has been working with children in schools, and especially from marginalized background, I remember Revathi telling me so many stories, actually, I mean, not just the ones when we were part of the women's movement and the cases that we got, but people for whom we have a name and a face and everything, and which is why we think that theatre can be the best by which we can raise voices. And if you catch them young, that's the best. Yeah.
On that note, I would actually like to turn to you, Revathi, and ask you how, I mean, of course, I'm sure you have stories and stories of what the last 2 years have looked like, but I was just wondering, even a slightly longer history in terms of how have you thought about this relationship between kind of the arts and education, because that's clearly the central thrust of your work, and especially working with kind of children from marginalized communities. Just how did you start thinking about this idea? If you could just tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. Thank you so much for this opportunity, because Jannatyam and Munch, and the history of it is it's like something that we hold very high in our minds. All of us in political theater do look up to that legacy, and so I'm very happy to be here to talk in this conversation. So I would like to just map it this way. When I was in school and college, theater was like a fun thing, like because to be part of the yearly production was like cool, and you can bunk classes, and it's like that's how I got into it. There's so much fun in it, and in college also. But actually, when I experienced political theater is when I realized that theater is like could be much more, and how ordinary people and the working classes, the women, children who grow up in slums can all contribute, like not just as subject matters, but as bodies, but as lived experiences, as audiences who are able to take in theater, because all the other theater, I'm not against the other theater, but it's for a certain audiences. And here, there is a huge there's a huge liminal space that opens up. I realized it really gave me a big high. And that's how I moved into theater. Then with Mangai, I got more, initially I was in the left movement. So we worked on street theater on civic issues and gender, not so much gender, but a lot of slum issues, because that's what I was working on. And then when we started doing feminist theater with Mangai and Geeta, of course, Pony and many others actually, that was a huge turnaround for me, because that's the first time I could explore myself. So from theater being a performance, then it became like a tool of discussion. Then I could also see that I could also place my experience into it and still be open for a discussion. So in short, that's the thing. But as I see education, when we started this school, we work with this community called Boom Boom Matakaras, who are actually ancient performers and soothsayers who are now reduced into a very marginalized existence, mostly through begging, because the bulls are not there, that village system is not there. So all our children are very, very good in, all children are good in music and arts, I feel, unless we stop them. But these children, because they've grown up in such a nomadic existence where music is very much a part of their life, they're like they were really like hyper energy. And when we started the school, the only thing that I knew also was to do plays and do art, and that is the only thing that will bring the children to our school. So for them, for children, generally school means school bag, teacher, all that periods. But for our children, from the beginning, it's been that they can do art. And then on the side, we started teaching them language and all that. So in a way, theater and art as painting and sculpture have been like central in the way we look at education. I think education is about exploring, and theater offers a great space for a safe exploration, because it's important that spaces need to be safe for children. Not only talking about extreme things like abuse, even about differences between themselves. There are like slight class differences between students, and even within a marginalized community, there are these things. So how do you negotiate, and how do you negotiate the boy child and the girl child starting to say, we don't like boys, we don't like girls from like 3rd standard, 4th standard. So one is it's a great space to have a conversation, and education essentially has to be a conversation, not just between the teacher and the students, amongst all people. So only through exploration you actually reach. And the other thing is, I believe education is also about doing, not just about reading and writing. It's about doing. So in that doing part, it's not an activity basically. Nowadays, the doing part is being ritualized into some activities, and then that's done. So doing drama in classroom, like exploring real situations, it is a very precious moment, a very loaded moment. It has helped us to cross barriers that the child has in learning. So I feel like theater in education is very, very, it's an extraordinary idea and concept to work with all children, more so in case of children who come from marginalized spaces.
And if I could ask you to follow up a little bit, Revati, in terms of, so what was the kind of, how did the last 2 years look like for you? Because, we've all seen so much that, of course, all kids, children have been affected by the lockdown, but that effect has been so disproportionate for people from certain classes, certain kinds of schools, certain areas, and working within this very specific kind of pedagogy that you work with, that kind of centers the body, saying students have to be there, they have to be together, they have to do things, and this kind of doing focus. Like, how did you follow that focus, and how did you have to rethink that, or were you able to do it, or did it have to all be on hold? Like, what happened?
So it was the most difficult 2 years for our people and for us also, because most of them are always on the move, like their parents, and children are very happy to come to our school. So schools have to be closed down, parents cannot go out, and there is absolutely no food. So the biggest crisis was of food, which we dealt with the relief mode. But we did not want the children to just be left like that, because we just couldn't. And two things happened actually. One thing happened without our help. Like, these kids went to fishing, went to climbing trees, finding food, like foraging in nearby areas, going for minor hunting with their fathers and brothers, which happened by itself, and which we thought is a great thing, because unlike the city kids who had to be locked in the room, these kids were experiencing life that otherwise, it's part of their history. So that was one part. But also there was a tough part where many kids had to go to work. They had to go to beg. And for them, we had to stop them, and we started running village classes. And when we said village classes, it was so difficult to run a class, because in the village, there is not much space. There are people are drunk, there's fights happening. So it's all happening, and you have these children with you in. So we did a lot of walking around, just talking about, like, when the water comes. We are in the Kaveri Delta. So when the water comes, we walk along the canal and talk about water and this and that. And we learned a lot of songs of hope and about birds. We did a project about birds where they built nests and all. So then they made a play on their own, which is about Valasai, that migration of birds, because there's a point in Nagapattinam where we work, where actually birds come from foreign. So we told them about the migrant laborers walking, and we showed them all those things. So they somewhere linked that birds migrating and this in a very how to say. So they actually, the kid asked, like, it's natural for the birds to migrate, and they can go back and they're fine. But why should these people be stranded? Especially the children. They were very, very affected by those children walking without chappal or sleeping on that suitcase and all. So that was something which was very unexpected, but I think it came together because we keep discussing everything, and then that came to that. So I feel like it shows two things. One, life teaches you a lot, and you have to keep learning, and by keen observation and processing it in your head, that's what education should give them. We were able to do that to some extent in the pandemic time also.
Okay. Thank you so much. And what has been really interesting to read about both of your work and your journey, and kind of thinking around how you've engaged with the performing arts, is this kind of very evolving picture of your relationship with the arts, right? That starts, both of you have kind of been associated with the left movement, with the women's movement, and then increasingly kind of changing what the terms of those participation are, how your art form also changes from being kind of street theater to looking at other kinds of possibilities of community performance. And so one of the questions that I think Jannati Manch has also been thinking about is to say, what is really the role of people in the arts in these kinds of moments of crises? And I realize this is a very large and abstract question, but I was just interested, for two people who've had such long and excitingly diverse kind of performing arts careers, how is it that, is that a question that comes up for you a lot, that you actively think about saying, what is the role, or is it something that's just organically you go from one thing to the other depending on the need, and then, in retrospect, there's something that comes together? So is just to get a sense of how you're thinking about.
Actually, I will rephrase it, Sharvi. I will ask myself, why do we keep going back to theatre?
Mm-hmm. That's a great reason.
That's I don't think I have one answer, and depending on the times, the answers keep changing. Mm-hmm. But I think some of the things are at the core. One is, of course, just being together and holding space, and also feeling safe. And I think somewhere it begins from there. I know theatre is about performance and audience and everything, but I think unless we experience this within ourselves and within our close circle of whoever we are working with, and however short that period is, supposing it's a workshop that you're doing, and at that time, if we don't keep the space and keep it safe, I don't think we can really find any meaningful expression. However large the questions are, I think it is this energy and the strength that comes and your sense of being who you are with all your vulnerabilities and strengths that really helps somewhere, to not give up, to keep going. So yeah, Revathi?
It's been a difficult question for me, and I've been grappling with it on and off because I work in the field. As I said, we run the school where we are able to do some theatre, but most of our time in the last 2 years has been about food relief. It's something that we just cannot move away from, because when grave situations come, there are two ways to respond, and one, we have to act on it if it is possible, wherever it depends on where you are. The other thing is also to raise your voice, but sometimes it's so tiring and it seems so hopeless, and you go into one difficult silence, and it's not comfortable, because then your mind keeps telling you, are you losing your voice? I faced that at least a few times in the pandemic. Am I losing my voice? But it was important to feed the people also, but still, and I have a partner who's an artist, and he was drawing every day, like so frenetically. He was so angry, and he was disturbed, and he was drawing every day. So it was constantly a struggle for me. And I just remembered this book when I did this course with Maya Rao in Shiv Nadar, the test course. So this friend of mine, Shena, she sent me this book by Anne Bogart, and it says, and then you act. Like, what do artists do in unpredictable times, or like Brecht saying, like, what do you do in dark times? And we have to keep the voices alive, is what I've realized. But it has been also very, very difficult, and psychologically, to keep yourself as an artist alive and trying to be in touch with other artists. And we were also working with folk artists during the pandemic and looking at their situation, and they were willing to do anything because all the temple things were closed down. So it was a difficult time for all the artists that we could meet. And when an artist becomes like a relief giver and relief taker, I was very it was a very disturbing moment for me, but then we did a performance later about creating awareness amongst people about the vaccine and these things. So for me, I would say, I think the point is that we have to act, we have to raise our voice, and it is a difficult, complex process.
Okay, and this again is, as a broader kind of question that I'm interested in thinking around your work, where in terms of like your artistic and political work, so much of it thinks about this idea of inclusion, right? Thinking around how do we build a kind of inclusive practice around education, around thinking around gender, around sexuality. And in a way, this is such a slippery slope in terms of, the landscape around us changes so quickly in terms of also it's kind of populated by political judgments, by the acts that come on at the central level. And so, maybe if I can start with you, Mangai, how have you been thinking around this question? And, you've also written a lot about it as well. But, thinking about how do you actually in practice evolve a kind of inclusive practice of what does it look like on a day-to-day basis to negotiate it, apart from the larger principles that one might have? What does it look like, and what's the struggle? What's the real struggle when things go wrong? How do you pick yourself up and say, okay, now I have to try again, or this didn't work, let's do it again? Which I think is a question that all of us have to at some point grapple with. So I was interested in your perspective of how you figure this out in practice.
Yeah, I think at least in Tamil Nadu, this question vis-a-vis caste and gender and sexuality has been really, really upfront, and I think more upfront after the elections. And we have a government which is facing the center and trying to really find its way of surviving as a respectable state within this federal system that we have. But I mean, at least with vis-a-vis the trans question, because for me, it is more than 2 decades now. So one of the things that really happened in these 2 years, I mean, apart from all the policy-based struggle and the critique of the law and everything, at the ground level, the question that Revathi was talking about, just absolute hunger and poverty, so that was one of the most crucial things for the artists and for the workers and for everyone else, so many of us had smaller groups that were working. It was amazing to see the way the trans groups came together, and I think this happened in Karnataka also, and I know in Tamil Nadu as well, so in Tamil Nadu, especially in Chennai, they made it almost like a movement, trans kitchens, so during the second wave, when there was stricter lockdown in the city, with the permission of the city corporation, the trans kitchens, one in North Madras and one in South Madras, could actually prepare food and distribute it to people for whom the food won't be available. Even in the hospitals, because there were patients, but nobody could go and meet them and give them the food. So for the patients separately and for the platform dwellers, I mean, I remember going for their, something of a valedictory event that one of the trans kitchens had in Chennai. And then it was just amazing to see that for once, you're not the receiver. And when they went around in PPE suit, and I still remember Soumya, who is also our actor in Siripudan Varadu. She was there as part of the trans kitchen. And then she said, when young children would wait for the scooter to arrive to take food, she said, it was so scary to see that these children are facing this kind of a plight. So that idea of the trans kitchen, and I think they gave me a big number, some 67,000 people whom they fed continuously for like 2 weeks, which was just amazing and solid, nutritious kind of preparation. And some of those people who were involved in it have also been part of our theatre work. So some of the things that they said, like how they would assemble in the morning, read out the menu, take different roles. They had almost done it like how we would do a rehearsal. And then including that of stretchers and, because for someone who's going to sit and keep cutting, or for someone who's going to carry heavy weight. So they needed different stretchers and everything. They literally stayed together and did that, so, which I think is, for me, it's a golden moment, of asserting one's dignity. And I think now the state government has actually passed the rule that colleges and schools should admit that anyone who is coming, and they should not be really stopped. I mean, the free bus tickets, which were announced for the women, the very next day was also included the trans women. And we have Nattagi, who is part of the planning commission. But Nattagi is primarily a dancer and has a different trajectory from the rest of the community. But I'm just happy, that they finally have a voice, and that's heard. So I guess it's a question of time, keeping on doing it, we have to keep raising critical questions. Because even within the trans community, we had to raise religious questions. We had questions about religion, questions about caste. I mean, we cannot just say, okay, you're marginalized and therefore you would understand the other marginalization. Sorry, doesn't seem to work like that. So it's just that. It's the grit of, just keeping on doing that.
I remember Soumya wearing PPE in one of her tech rehearsals, and she was starting on her distribution drive. It just remains in my mind. That was really hopeful. Mangai is a very, very hopeful person. So for me, it's also rubs on from people like her, because I think I'm on the other side of the spectrum. I think for me, it is, however unjust this world could be, however horrible some of the things that are happening to our fellow human beings are, and there's so much suffering and injustice all around. And sometimes you wonder, what is the point of art? Because everything is online, lives are online and all that. And I think always the thing that takes me back to art is the happiness that it can give through all these things, even despite these injustices, and it's in a very, very hierarchicalized world of every kind and type. We are still able to be as a group of people to coexist, like it's a fraternity of being together and just being, and happiness is what art brings to people. And we see that even in when we are doing relief work and all, and then when we break into a song, I mean, food is really important, but that alone does not make you feel alive. When you are like so deprived or when you are so oppressed, it's not just the things that matter, but it's also the connections that you make. And that is, art is the connection that keeps the world alive, I believe. And that's the thing that keeps me going. If there is time, I just want to say this small, read out this small thing from that Anne Bogart book. She writes about the South African writer Anshe Krog described meeting a nomadic desert poet in Senegal who described the role of poets in his culture. The job of the poet, which I think suits any artist, he explained to her, is to remember where the water holes are. The survival of the whole group depends on a few water holes scattered around the desert. When his people forget where the water is, the poet can lead them to it. So I keep reading it to myself at difficult times. So I think it's important that we keep singing about the water holes through theater, art, and every other form.
That's so beautiful.
That is, and it's a great note, I think, on which to conclude our conversation. Thank you so much, Mangai, and thank you so much, Revathi, for making time for this.
Thank you. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity. To all fellow artists and to Jana.
To Janam.
Thank you so much. Very honored.